They went live to save their careers and ended up destroying their boss. Rebecca Morris found out her studio was being taken from her 12 minutes before going on air. The message arrived as a calendar update, not even a conversation. Studio B reassigned. New project. Mandatory. No explanation. No signature. Just a cold block of text stamped with the logo of the holding company that now owned everything, including, apparently, her silence. She reread it twice, jaw tightening. Studio B was not just a room. It was controlled acoustics, predictable lighting, a space where conversation stayed focused and guests felt safe enough to think before speaking. It was the opposite of chaos. It was hers. When she stepped into the corridor, she already knew who the new project involved. She could hear him before she saw him. Laughter. Loud, careless, bouncing off the walls like it didn't belong to anyone in particular. A sound designed to dominate space. Oscar Rain leaned against the doorframe of what used to be Studio B, coffee in hand, jacket thrown over one shoulder as if professionalism were an optional accessory. He was talking to a junior producer, reenacting something with exaggerated gestures. The producer laughed too hard. Everyone always laughed too hard around Oscar. Rebecca stopped a few steps away. "So," she said, voice calm, measured, sharp enough to cut without rising. "You're in my studio." Oscar turned, eyes flicking over her with open curiosity, like she was an unexpected guest rather than the person whose schedule he'd just bulldozed. "Correction," he said. "Our studio. Starting today." She didn't blink. "That's not how booking works." He smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he enjoyed the fact that she was already irritated. "That's not how hostile takeovers work either, but here we are." The producer vanished on cue, suddenly remembering an urgent task elsewhere. Rebecca stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My show starts in 9 minutes. You're blocking my setup. And mine starts in 11. Oscar replied easily. "Looks like fate wants us synchronized." "Fate doesn't send calendar updates," she said. "Executives do." At that, something flickered behind his grin. Not guilt. Recognition. "Ah," he said. "You haven't had the pleasure yet." "The pleasure of what?" "Meeting our new owner." Rebecca already disliked the answer. They were summoned upstairs 3 minutes later. No discussion. No negotiation. A shared assistant appeared, pale and apologetic, guiding them to the executive floor that had been renovated so quickly it still smelled like fresh paint and money. Henry Blackwood didn't stand when they entered. He sat behind a desk too large for the room, fingers steepled, eyes sharp and unblinking. A man who didn't need to raise his voice because systems did it for him. "Rebecca Morris," he said. "Oscar Rain." At last, the stars aligned. Rebecca nodded once. "Professional. Neutral." Oscar gave a small salute. "Careful. When people say that, something usually explodes." Blackwood smiled thinly. "That's the idea." He explained it clinically. Declining ratings. Fragmented audiences. A desperate need for engagement. The solution, collision. "Your shows," Blackwood said, sliding a document across the desk, "will merge. One time slot. One studio. Live. Unfiltered." Rebecca skimmed the page. Her name was there. Oscar's too. So was the penalty clause. Her stomach dropped, but her voice didn't change. "This format undermines everything my audience trusts." "Yes," Blackwood agreed. "And Oscar's audience will love watching you try to maintain it." Oscar leaned back in his chair. "And you want us to tear each other apart." "I want authenticity," Blackwood said smoothly. "Conflict. Sparks. The illusion that you despise each other." "The illusion?" Rebecca asked. Blackwood's eyes slid to Oscar. "For him, it won't be an illusion." Oscar's jaw tightened for the first time. "You're still mad about that old scandal?" "I'm patient," Blackwood replied, "and very good at waiting for leverage." Rebecca closed the folder. "If we refuse?" Blackwood tapped a line on the page. "The termination fee. Large enough to destroy your careers separately. Together, you might survive." Silence settled, heavy and deliberate. Rebecca stood. "This is coercion." "This is media," Blackwood corrected. "Your first joint broadcast is tomorrow morning." Outside the office, neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then Oscar laughed under his breath. "Well, congratulations. We're married." She stopped walking. "Don't joke." "I'm not," he said. "Forced partnership. Public performance. Mutual destruction if it fails." Sounds familiar. Rebecca met his gaze, finally allowing her irritation to surface fully. If you sabotage my work. If you try to turn my audience into a lecture hall. They spoke at the same time, then stopped. Something shifted. Not understanding. Awareness. They were trapped in the same mechanism. This doesn't work, she said quietly. No, Oscar agreed. But it'll be loud. The red light went on the next morning at exactly 8 a.m. Rebecca sat upright, notes prepared, breathing steady. Oscar sprawled beside her, tapping the mic once just to see if it would echo. Good morning, he said into the air. Welcome to whatever this is. Rebecca didn't look at him. Today's discussion was supposed to be about ethical journalism. And now, Oscar added, it's about how ethical journalism survives sitting next to me. The tension was immediate. Electric. Unavoidable. Somewhere behind the glass, executives smiled. The first real disaster didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence. The kind that stretches just a second too long on live radio, where listeners lean closer to their speakers, sensing blood before it spilled. Rebecca finished her opening statement with precision, her voice calm, composed, built to command trust. She folded her hands on the desk, eyes forward, waiting for the transition cue that should have come from the producer. It didn't. Oscar glanced at the sound engineer through the glass, raised an eyebrow, then leaned toward his microphone. So, he said lightly, Rebecca just told us what responsible discourse looks like, which makes me curious. She felt it before he finished the sentence. Rebecca, Oscar continued, have you ever lied on air? Her fingers tightened. That question is irrelevant, she replied evenly. Integrity isn't about. Because, Oscar cut in smoothly. I found an old interview where you said you'd never accept corporate sponsorships that influence content. Yet here you are. Same building as me. Same owner. A ripple of reaction flashed behind the glass. Producers shifting. Someone mouthing careful. Rebecca turned her head slowly toward him. If you'd bothered to listen to that interview, she said, you'd know I was referring to undisclosed sponsorships. Transparency matters. Oh, absolutely, Oscar nodded. So let's be transparent. Did Blackwood influence what you plan to say today? The question landed hard. Rebecca inhaled, choosing each word like a chess move. No. Oscar smiled. Blinked twice if that was rehearsed. She ignored the jab and turned back to the mic. This is exactly the kind of bad faith provocation that damages public discourse. And this, Oscar replied, is why people stop listening when experts talk. The phones lit up. Calls flooded the system faster than the screener could tag them. Social media monitors spiked. Hashtags began forming in real time. Rebecca could feel control slipping, not because she lacked arguments, but because Oscar wasn't playing against her. He was playing for the audience. He leaned back, hands behind his head, voice casual. Tell me something real, Rebecca. Off script. Do you think people tune in for truth or for blood? She stared at him, then spoke into the mic without looking away. I think people deserve better than being treated like animals in a pit. And yet, Oscar said, the pit is full. A call was patched through without her approval. Rebecca sounds like she hates normal people, a male voice said. Oscar's just asking what we're thinking. Rebecca's throat tightened, but she didn't raise her voice. What you're thinking deserves respect, not manipulation. Funny, Oscar replied softly, that you think those are opposites. By the time the red light went off, the studio was suffocating. Rebecca pulled off her headphones and stood. You deliberately undermined me. Oscar shrugged. I asked questions. You ambushed me. I entertained the room. She leaned closer, keeping her voice low. This isn't a game show. No, he said, finally meeting her eyes seriously. It's worse. It's survival. She scoffed. You think humiliating me helps you? I think, Oscar replied, standing as well, that pretending this format can be civil as a lie. And lies die faster on live radio. They were interrupted by applause. Not from staff. From the numbers on the screen. Ratings higher than either of their solo shows had seen in months. An executive gave them a thumbs up through the glass. Rebecca looked back at Oscar, disgusted. They're enjoying this. He nodded once. Told you. Blood. She gathered her notes, hands trembling just enough to notice. You're a clown. And you're a statue, he shot back. Perfect. Untouchable. And boring to watch crack. Her eyes flashed. You think this is cracking? No, Oscar said quietly. This is warming up. They passed each other in the hallway without another word. But later that evening, Rebecca sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through reactions she told herself she wouldn't read. She's so cold. Oscar finally said what needed to be said. Why does she look like she hates him? One comment stopped her. I hate them both, but I can't stop listening. Across the city, Oscar stared at his phone too, jaw set. He tossed it onto the couch, irritation simmering beneath the bravado. Blackwood had gotten exactly what he wanted. And somehow, that made both of them lose. The discovery was an accident. If either of them had been more careful, more cautious, it wouldn't have happened. But exhaustion made people sloppy, and fear made them curious. Rebecca stayed late to re-record a segment that had been cut short during the chaos of the morning broadcast. The studio lights were dimmed, the building quieter than usual, the kind of silence that made every footstep sound like an intrusion. She gathered her notes, slipped them into her bag, and headed toward the elevators. They were locked for the night. A handwritten sign taped to the panel redirected staff to the service corridor. She sighed, heels clicking as she followed the narrow hallway that led behind the executive wing, an area she normally avoided. That was when she heard voices. She slowed, instinct sharp. The door to the conference room was slightly ajar, lights spilling out in a thin line across the floor. Henry Blackwood was speaking. Doesn't matter which one implodes first, he said calmly. The audience only needs to see the collapse. Once credibility is gone, they're finished. Rebecca froze. Another voice replied, lower, cautious, legal. And if they realize the setup? Blackwood laughed softly. They won't. They're too busy reacting to each other. That's the beauty of it. There was a pause. Papers shuffled. We push him, Blackwood continued. He's predictable. Provocation, ego, history. As for her, she'll crack eventually. People like her always do when they lose control. Rebecca's pulse hammered in her ears. And the contracts? The second voice asked. The penalty clauses stand. If they walk, they drown. If they stay, we burn them slowly. Either way, the network wins. Rebecca stepped back, heart racing, every instinct screaming to leave. Her heel caught on the edge of the carpet. A faint sound, barely audible, but the voices inside stopped. She didn't wait to see if the door opened. She turned and walked fast, not running, not panicking, just moving with the forced calm of someone who knew panic would be visible on her face. She rounded the corner and almost collided with Oscar. He steadied her by reflex, hands gripping her arms. Easy. She yanked free immediately. Don't touch me. Relax, he muttered. I'm not in the mood. Then he noticed her expression. Not anger. Not disdain. Fear. What happened, he asked. She hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust him. He thrived on chaos. He used weakness as fuel. But the words she'd overheard pressed against her ribs, demanding release. They're setting us up, she said quietly. Oscar's posture shifted. I know. She blinked. You what? I heard it too, he said. Different conversation. Same ending. They stood there, suspended in the hum of fluorescent lights, the building suddenly feeling smaller, tighter. They're not trying to save the network, Rebecca said. They're trying to destroy us. Oscar nodded. Specifically me. You're collateral damage. Her jaw tightened. That's not comforting. It's honest, he replied. Blackwood's had a grudge since that scandal years ago. I embarrassed him publicly. He waited until he could own the stage. Rebecca crossed her arms. So this show is a slow execution, Oscar finished. Live. With applause. Silence fell between them. Different from the one on air. Heavier. Real. For the first time, Rebecca saw past the performance. Past the grin, the provocation. What remained was anger sharpened into something colder. We can't just react anymore, she said. Oscar looked at her, surprised. You're suggesting strategy? I'm suggesting survival, she replied. They want us to destroy each other. Which means the only way out is to refuse to do it. He exhaled slowly. You're asking me to stop being myself on air. I'm asking you to be smarter than them, she said. And I'll do the same. He studied her for a long moment, measuring sincerity. If we do this, he said, we can't be half honest. They'll sense it. I know, Rebecca replied. Which means in public, we give them exactly what they want. And in private, we work together. Oscar laughed once, short and humorless. You realize how insane that sounds. Yes, she said. But it's the only move left. Footsteps echoed at the far end of the corridor. A security guard, rounding the corner. They instinctively stepped apart. Oscar lowered his voice. If Blackwood even suspects we're aligned, he'll tighten the leash, Rebecca said. Which is why he can't know. The guard passed them with a nod, uninterested. When the sound faded, Oscar looked at her again. So what? Secret alliance. Temporary, she said. Conditional. He smirked. Of course. She met his gaze, steady. If you betray this. I won't, he said, more quickly than she expected. Then, quieter, I don't like being played. Neither did she. They walked toward the exit together, not side by side, but no longer enemies by default. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. The city hummed, indifferent to their crisis. Rebecca stopped before heading to her car. Tomorrow, she said. We argue. Oscar nodded. Loudly. But underneath, she continued, we listen. We adapt. We gather proof. And when the time's right, Oscar said, eyes narrowing. We flip the script. For the first time since the merger began, Rebecca felt something close to relief. Not trust, but alignment. They parted without another word. Above them, in an office still lit on the executive floor, Henry Blackwood watched the city through tinted glass, confident. He didn't know that the game had just changed. They didn't start with trust. They started with rules. Rebecca arrived early the next morning and locked herself in the small editing room 2 floors below the main studio. It was quiet there, forgotten, the kind of place executives never entered because nothing important was supposed to happen inside it. Oscar showed up 6 minutes late on purpose. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. Okay, temporary alliance. Conditional cooperation. What are the terms? Rebecca slid a sheet of paper across the table. No improvisation that directly targets my credibility, she said. No personal history unless we agree on it beforehand. And no surprises on air. Oscar skimmed the list, snorted. You just killed half my toolkit. Good, she replied. That's the half they're exploiting. He looked up at her. My turn. You don't shut me down mid-sentence. Ever. Even if you hate where I'm going. She hesitated, then nodded once. Agreed. He tapped the page. And we need a signal. A what? A way to tell each other we're about to pivot. Something the audience won't notice. Rebecca considered it. I adjust my glasses when I'm changing topics. Oscar smirked. Perfect. I'll stop smiling. Hardly subtle. For me, it is. They locked eyes for a second longer than necessary, then both looked away. It felt strangely intimate. This quiet planning. This mutual exposure of habits usually hidden behind performance. On air, they were ruthless. Oscar leaned into provocation harder than before, asking questions that brushed close to insult without crossing the line. Rebecca responded with controlled precision, dissecting his points instead of dismissing them. Their arguments felt sharper, cleaner, more intentional. The audience ate it up. What they didn't hear were the pauses, the moments where Rebecca adjusted her glasses and Oscar redirected, where Oscar dropped his grin and Rebecca took the lead. Beneath the hostility, a rhythm formed. Between shows, they met in neutral spaces. A diner across the street. A stairwell no one used. Once, in Oscar's car during a thunderstorm, the radio turned off so no microphones could listen. They didn't call them dates. But they happened at night, when exhaustion stripped away performance. Rebecca spread documents across the diner table. Blackwood's acquisitions. Shell companies. Offshore accounts. Oscar whistled quietly. You really are terrifying. She didn't smile. This doesn't help us unless we connect it to the network. I'm working on that, he said. Old contacts. People who owe me favors. She glanced at him. You trust them? I trust that they hate Blackwood more than they like me. Fair. They leaned closer over the table, voices low. She could smell coffee on his breath. He noticed the faint tremor in her hands when she scrolled too fast. You don't sleep much, he said. I don't like wasting time, she replied. Same thing, he muttered. The first crack came unexpectedly. A joke landed harder than planned. The audience laughed too loudly. Rebecca's control slipped for half a second, irritation flashing across her face before she masked it. Oscar saw it. After the show, in the hallway, he stopped her. You okay? I'm fine. That wasn't the signal, he said quietly. That was real. She hesitated, then exhaled. I'm not used to being this exposed. He nodded. Me neither. Just in different ways. That night, they met again, this time in her apartment. Strictly strategic, she told herself. They sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, laptops open, scripts scattered. Outside, the city pulsed with distant sirens and rain. Oscar leaned forward, elbows on his knees. If this works, he said. We don't just save ourselves. We burn his whole operation. Rebecca closed her laptop. Careful. Revenge clouds judgment. He looked at her. So does fear. Silence settled, not uncomfortable this time. She shifted closer without noticing. He handed her a document, their fingers brushing briefly. Neither of them pulled away immediately. Rebecca cleared her throat. We should keep this professional. Oscar's voice was low. We are. They both knew it was already becoming something else. Not romance. Not yet. But closeness born of shared danger, and the quiet understanding that behind closed doors, the masks were slipping. And for the first time, Blackwood's perfect reality show was no longer entirely under his control. The marathon was Blackwood's idea. 12 hours, he announced in the morning briefing, voice smooth with false generosity. A charity broadcast. Public goodwill. You'll both stay live. No cuts. No delays. Rebecca immediately saw the trap. Fatigue. Slips. Unfiltered reactions. Oscar saw the same thing and smiled like it was a challenge. They went live at noon. By hour 3, the studio lights felt hotter. By hour 5, the arguments sharpened again, not because they planned it, but because exhaustion stripped away polish. Rebecca corrected herself mid-sentence more often. Oscar's jokes edged closer to bitterness. The audience numbers climbed. Blackwood hovered behind the glass at intervals, watching like a man observing an experiment. At hour 7, Rebecca adjusted her glasses twice. Oscar caught it and shifted, steering the conversation away from a topic that would have forced her into a corner. She noticed. She didn't thank him. She simply continued. By hour 9, their voices were hoarse. During a brief off-air break, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. 10 minutes, she murmured. I just need. Her head tipped sideways before she finished the sentence. Oscar reacted without thinking. He shifted closer, letting her rest against his shoulder. She was lighter than he expected. Tense even in sleep, brow faintly furrowed. He didn't move. The studio was quiet except for the hum of equipment. Through the glass, a producer watched, unsure whether to interrupt. Oscar raised a finger. Don't. Rebecca slept for 6 minutes. When she stirred, confused, he spoke softly. You snore? Barely. She straightened immediately. I do not. Relax, he said. Your reputation survived. She glanced at the clock, then at him. Why didn't you wake me? Because you needed it, Oscar replied. And because Blackwood would have loved to see you collapse on air. Something in his tone stopped her from snapping back. Back live, something had shifted. The insults dulled. The rhythm smoothed. When Oscar provoked, Rebecca responded without venom. When she challenged, he listened instead of deflecting. Listeners noticed. Messages changed. They sound different tonight. Less fake. More real. At hour 11, a caller thanked them for staying honest when the format tried to force cruelty. Blackwood's smile faded slightly. The final minutes approached. Rebecca felt it in her bones. She was beyond tired, past adrenaline, past control. Oscar caught her eye. No grin. Just focus. They finished the broadcast together, voices steady despite the strain. When the red light finally went dark, Rebecca exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. She stood, legs unsteady. Oscar reached out, steadying her by the elbow. She didn't pull away. In the empty hallway afterward, she leaned against the wall, eyes closed. I hate that this worked. Oscar huffed a laugh. Yeah, me too. She opened her eyes and looked at him properly, for the first time without irritation or defense. You protected me today, she said. He shrugged. Don't get sentimental. I'm being factual. That made him smile, just a little. They left the building together well after midnight. City streets slick with rain, neon reflecting off pavement. Neither of them mentioned the way she'd slept on his shoulder. Neither of them forgot it either. The ice hadn't shattered, but it had cracked enough to let something warm through. The hit came 2 days later. Not on Oscar. On Rebecca. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw the headline cued on the studio monitor before going live. No warning. No internal memo. Just a bold teaser graphic, already formatted, already approved. Exclusive, the moral authority with a family secret. Her chest tightened. Oscar followed her gaze, amusement dying instantly. That wasn't in the rundown. No, she said quietly. It wasn't. The producer's voice crackled in their headphones. Blackwood wants to handle the intro himself. Rebecca's fingers went cold. Henry Blackwood appeared in the control room. stepping into view behind the glass with the confidence of a man who enjoyed timing his cruelty. He gave a small nod, then raised his hand. The red light came on. "Good evening." Blackwood's voice filled the studio, smooth and controlled. "Tonight's discussion is about credibility, about the stories we tell and the ones we hide." Rebecca sat perfectly still. If this was what she thought it was, any reaction would feed him. Oscar leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the glass. Blackwood continued, "Our listeners trust us, especially when we position ourselves as moral authorities. But what happens when the past doesn't align with the image?" A document flashed on the monitor. A surname. Her mother's. Rebecca's breath caught, just for a fraction of a second. Blackwood's voice softened. Years ago, a close family member of Rebecca Morris was involved in a financial scandal that harmed hundreds of people. Charges were never formally pursued, but questions remain. The implication was clear. Guilt by proximity. Silence as complicity. Oscar's jaw clenched. Blackwood turned it into a question, perfectly calculated. "Rebecca, did your family's past influence your views on ethics? Or is silence part of your brand?" The studio held its breath. Rebecca spoke carefully. "My family's actions are not mine. I've addressed my background publicly. This is irrelevant to the topic." Blackwood smiled. "Our audience may disagree." Phones lit up instantly. Oscar didn't wait for a signal. He leaned into the mic. "No. This is garbage." The word cut through the studio like glass. Blackwood's smile vanished. Oscar's voice was steady, dangerous. "You don't get to weaponize someone's family to goose ratings. Especially when you know damn well there were no charges." Rebecca turned toward him, stunned. This wasn't in the plan. "And for the record," Oscar continued, "if we're dragging relatives into this, maybe we should talk about how your acquisitions keep disappearing into offshore accounts." A producer shouted in the control room. Blackwood snapped something into his headset. Rebecca reached for Oscar's arm instinctively. "Oscar, I'm not finished," he said, eyes still on the glass. "You wanted cruelty? Fine. But don't pretend it's journalism." The line went dead. The red light shut off mid-sentence. Silence crashed down. For a moment, no one moved. Then Blackwood stormed out of the control room. A senior producer rushed in. "What the hell were you thinking?" Oscar pulled off his headphones. "I was thinking you crossed a line." Rebecca's hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something else. In the hallway, Blackwood caught up to them, face hard. "You violated your contract." Oscar stepped forward. "You violated basic decency. I can have you fired by morning," Blackwood said coldly. Rebecca found her voice. "Then you'll explain why you leaked unverified personal information on your own network." Blackwood looked at her, surprised. "You want me to sign his termination?" she continued evenly. "Put it in writing." He studied her for a long second, recalculating. "This isn't over," he said finally. "No," Rebecca agreed. "It isn't." He walked away. The hallway emptied. The adrenaline faded, leaving silence and harsh fluorescent light. Oscar leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "You're going to hate me." Rebecca stepped closer. "You shouldn't have done that." "I know." She looked up at him. "Thank you." The word landed between them, heavy. "For the first time," she added quietly, "someone chose me over the show." Oscar swallowed. "Don't make it weird." She almost smiled. Outside, night had fallen again, the city buzzing as if nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted. Blackwood had shown his hand, and Oscar had burned his safety net to stop him. They didn't go home. Not immediately. The adrenaline was too thick, and the office too full of echoes that reminded them of Blackwood's reach. They left through the side door, slipping into the streets of the city at night. Neon lights reflected in puddles, rain-slicked asphalt glimmering under their footsteps. Neither spoke at first. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was necessary. Rebecca finally broke it. "I can't believe he tried to use my past like that." Her voice was low, controlled, but the edge of anger was unmistakable. Oscar exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. "He's a snake. Predictable. Lazy. Dangerous. But predictable." She glanced at him, caught in the flicker of streetlight. For the first time, she wasn't seeing the loud provocateur on air. She was seeing a man who calculated risk as well as she did. Not recklessly, but daringly. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked quietly. "The fighting, the shows, the stunts?" He shrugged. "Tired? Sure. Bored? Never. I like surviving." "You." She thought about the endless scripts, the pressure to maintain perfection. I like creating. Not this. His gaze softened slightly, though his usual grin was gone. Yeah, me neither. But it's easier when someone's got your back. Rebecca's step faltered. I don't need protection. You don't, he said quickly. You need someone who isn't trying to exploit your weakness. That's different. They walked further, past shuttered cafes and empty streets, the city feeling infinite at that hour. The neon from a sign reflected in her eyes, making her catch her own reflection. She didn't look away when he glanced at her. At a quiet corner, Oscar stopped. I don't know how much we can trust anyone in that building anymore, he said. But I trust you. Enough to tell you something. Rebecca held his gaze. Go on. He hesitated, then gestured toward the office district behind them. If Blackwood thinks he can push us into humiliating each other, he's wrong. I'm not just going to survive this. I'm going to make sure he doesn't win. And I can't do it alone. Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from the intensity in his eyes. We're partners, she said softly. Not friends, not allies in the usual sense, but partners. He nodded, but his eyes lingered. For now, they continued walking in silence, shoulders occasionally brushing. No words were needed to communicate the fragile trust forming between them. At the corner of the street, she stopped. We have to plan. Every move, every word. We can't slip up again. He smirked faintly. I like planning with you. Makes the chaos feel manageable. Rebecca resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Just keep your chaos contained for 12 hours at a time, and we'll be fine. Deal, he said, extending his hand. She took it firmly, a silent pact. The night swallowed them in anonymity as they vanished from the city streets, two reluctant conspirators bound by circumstance and necessity. For the first time, the radio rivalry felt like something else entirely. Less performance, more strategy, more dangerous intimacy. And neither of them could deny it. The game had changed. Blackwood didn't know yet, but soon he would. The next morning, the tension was palpable. The studio smelled of stale coffee and fear. Every movement felt measured, every glance loaded with possibility. Rebecca arrived first, setting up her notes with meticulous care. Oscar arrived shortly after, leaning casually against the doorway, grin back in place, but his eyes sharp, alert. Morning, he said, voice light. Feeling brave. Cautious, she corrected. Brave doesn't survive Blackwood's office. He smirked. Fair enough. They were called upstairs within the hour. Blackwood's office had a new urgency. He was watching them more closely than ever, tapping into the live feed from their studio. He had a plan, and it was surgical. You've caused complications, he said as soon as they entered, voice calm but edged with menace. Oscar, Rebecca, your ratings spike is impressive, but control is slipping. I need predictability. I need compliance. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She didn't flinch. Oscar's hand brushed hers ever so slightly as he passed the papers across the desk. Small, almost imperceptible, but enough. I don't think our methods align with your expectations, Rebecca said evenly. We adhere to facts, context, ethics. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Ethics do not pay bills. Ratings do. And sometimes, loyalty requires sacrifice. You've caused complications, he said, sliding a document toward Rebecca. It was a formal termination of collaboration, citing Oscar's unacceptable professional conduct during the previous broadcast. If she signed, Oscar was out, his career blacklisted, but her show would be restored to its original format. Rebecca didn't look at the pen. She looked at the clause that linked her signature to a non-disclosure agreement. This isn't about his conduct, she said evenly. It's about silencing us both. She pushed the document back and signed. I don't sign contracts that ignore the facts. We finish the broadcast cycle together, as per the original agreement. Or we all go to court. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. He had lost his legal leverage. As they left the office, Oscar leaned slightly toward her, his voice barely a whisper. You just neutralized his last move. Ready to finish this? Rebecca adjusted her glasses. Let's go live. As they left the office, the energy between them had shifted. No longer just wary collaborators, no longer just forced partners. They were aligned. A subtle closeness had formed, built not on attraction or strategy alone, but on trust, tested, earned, and unbreakable in that moment. The game had escalated, and for the first time, the advantage was theirs. The final broadcast began under the usual chaos of the studio. Blinking lights, ringing phones, and a low hum of tension. But this time, Rebecca and Oscar carried something different: control and purpose. The audience expected another day of hostility. Instead, they got precision. Every question, every answer, every interruption was calculated. Every argument was a setup for a reveal. Oscar started, as usual, leaning into provocation. "Rebecca, the audience wants honesty. Let's give them some." Rebecca adjusted her glasses subtly, a signal. He nodded, voice softening, no longer biting. Together, they guided the conversation, gradually peeling back the layers of Blackwood's operations. Offshore accounts, manipulated ratings, hidden contracts, misused funds. Every revelation was timed, every detail verified, every accusation undeniable. Listeners were hooked, not by spectacle, but by revelation. Calls flooded the line. Comments exploded online. People couldn't stop listening. Behind the glass, Blackwood's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to disbelief. Every move he thought would control them had been turned against him. Rebecca leaned toward the microphone. "What you're hearing isn't opinion. It's fact, documentation, and it's available to anyone who wants to verify it." Oscar added, steady, unwavering. "This is what happens when power is abused. And when people stay silent, believing someone else will act. Tonight, we act. Together." They spoke in unison for the final segment, voices harmonized with intent. It was a rare moment. No masks, no performance, just truth. When the red light finally switched off, there was silence in the studio. Not tension, but release. They looked at each other and allowed themselves a small, exhausted smile. Outside, the city was alive, oblivious to the upheaval inside the studio. But the world had already noticed. Social media exploded. News outlets picked up the story. Blackwood's misdeeds were public. His control had slipped entirely. Oscar reached for Rebecca's hand. She didn't pull away. "This is it," he whispered. "We did it." She nodded, voice quiet but firm. "We did it together." For the first time, the rivalry was gone. The forced animosity dissolved into mutual respect, trust, and the promise of something deeper. No longer just collaborators. No longer just partners in a survival game. They had become equals, allies. And somewhere in that exhausted, victorious silence, a subtle understanding passed between them. The mask of performance could stay off now. They had reclaimed their agency, their careers, and, unexpectedly, each other. They didn't stay to watch the fallout in the newsroom. They left the building as the first light of dawn began to gray the city skyline. They walked side by side, the cool morning air finally washing away the smell of stale studio coffee. "So," Oscar said, his voice soft as they reached a quiet corner. "No scripts, no cameras, no Blackwood. What now?" Rebecca stopped, looking at the city stretching beneath them. "Now," she said, a real smile finally breaking across her face, "we take that vacation. And then, we build something of our own. Independent. No corporate leash." "Together?" he asked, searching her gaze. "Together," she confirmed. Later that morning, in a small, quiet cafe far from the media district, they sat in a corner booth. There were no microphones to catch their conversation, no audience to judge their chemistry. Rebecca reached across the table, her hand finding his. Oscar squeezed her fingers gently, the performative mask of the clown gone for good. For the first time, they weren't just two voices in the dark. They were two people finally writing their own story, 1 hour at a time. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.